2nd and Scott Road, Surrey. Hurry for the best selection.
Woodward's Food Floor is the only place that gives you this kind of choice. First, there's one of the biggest selection of name brands that you trust for quality and flavor. Then there's Woodward's own brands. They're made up to a quality, not down to a price, but great value. And when economy is the most important buying decision, there's unbranded products, low-priced every day. Remember, for a great choice and good, honest value.
Woodward's has it all.
Good morning. A word of warning if you're going to Los Angeles. Even if you're staying in a fancy hotel like the Century Plaza on Century Boulevard, just overnight to continue your trip to Mexico for your 30th wedding anniversary, beware. You can be directed to a flower shop down the street from the Century Plaza, and whammo, you're mugged, shot, twice in the throat. This happened to a Surrey couple called the Sprechers, and Mr. Eric Sprecher narrowly escaped with his life. Here's part of the interview you'll see in full later on the program this very morning with Mr. Sprecher.
It's all split seconds. He sees a gun that I pushed against it, he pushed against it.
And two shots.
And he shot right away.
And where were you hit?
Well, I'd beside the throat and out the back.
One shot or two shots?
Two shots.
Dreadful. More with the Sprechers later. First, a piece of happier news. You and I both want to make money. Now, if you're really smart in the affairs of how things are handled or have been handled by the federal government, there's a perfectly easy way to make money. You buy a motel from the federal government. Not for $200,000 or $20,000 or $2,000, but for $200. And you sell it the next day for $70,000. And a little later, that same place sold by the federal government for $200 is worth $625,000. The man who uncovers these dreadful things is the man regarded by Prime Minister Trudeau as a perfectionist paid to find fault. None other than Vancouver's own, but of course the nation's Auditor General from Ottawa. And we'll try and get other tips on how to make easy money if we know how the system works from him in the program. And then another candidate in the seemingly endless list of people who want a thankless and perhaps hopeless job of leader of the New Democratic Party to replace Davy Barrett. This very morning, there's another candidate coming out of the woodwork called Vickers. But in the studio here, we've got one of the leading contenders, Bill King, defeated in the last election, former Minister of Labour in the NDP government, and throwing his hat into the ring for the job of NDP leader. But first, Kenneth Dye and how to make a quick buck after the break.
We can make some significant savings and gains, I think, if we had political will that said, let's get on with good management. Now, I'm aware that good management isn't necessarily going to get a lot of votes, but I think it's very important.
This is not Ripley, believe it or not. This is Kenneth Dye, the Auditor General of Canada. Please tell me, I thought that the horses were off the payroll and that this kind of flagrant nugatory payment was down the tubes long ago. You're still finding in your current investigations, would you call this a scandalous one, the motel that sold for $200?
Sure, it's a waste of public money.
Please tell me how it came about that we sold a motel worth hundreds of thousands of dollars for $200 and had no protections against such a rip-off?
Well, actually, the motel was sold by a trust company that was owed money. And part of the money that they were always guaranteed by the government of Canada, $315,000. The government paid off their $315,000, and the motel was then sold at an auction for the grand sum of $200, and there was only one bid put up.
Was there only one bid at the auction?
I don't know how many people were present, but there was one bid put up of $200.
$200?
That's all.
And did the government have no representative? This was a DRE grant, was it not?
Yeah.
Did the government have no representatives there in any of its facets to protect the asset of the nation?
No, they didn't have any of their lawyers there or any of their representatives from DRE.
Did the government move in with any actions to seize the furnishings or put in a kind of protective bid of maybe $500?
There wasn't even a protective bid. Oh, it's a scandalous waste of public funds. It's an isolated incident, so I don't want you to get the impression this goes on everywhere, but here's one where we came across it in our audit, much to the embarrassment, I suppose, of the ministry and of the minister.
Which ministry would that be?
That would be Ed Lumley, I think.
Ed Lumley. That would be Parks. No.
No, this is ITC, and now part of that dry
and
reorganization.
Would there be, and this is a question the man in the pub would ask, would there be a police investigation and somebody charged with gross negligence or whatever in connection, because it was later evaluated at $625,000?
There well could be, because the department officials called in the RCMP as soon as we brought this to their attention.
So when you bring that to their attention, they do look at it from a point of view of possible criminal proceedings?
Well, yeah, the horse is out of the barn.
That's right, but I mean, 200 or whatever it was, $350,000, $318,000, peanuts in your investigations, is it not?
Really is. I mean, $315,000 is a very small part of the $100 billion or so that Canada spends annually.
Of that $100 billion, although I see there's a figure here that the total expenditures which you show are only $83 billion. Why do you say $100 billion?
Well, 83 is, I think, the planned expenditure for next year, but that doesn't include things like unemployment insurance, Canada Pension Plan. The accounts of this country are drawn up on a basis that conforms with the law. In my view, it doesn't really tie in with economic substance.
All right, of that $100 billion which we kick in and they kick out, how much is wasted? How many billions are wasted?
There's some. How much, one never knows. It's hard to tell what's waste and what's good politics.
You'd be hard-pressed to say it was less than 1%, less than $1 billion wasted.
I've never been able to quantify the number, Jack. I'd like to know the answer to that question, too.
And you could never have a big enough staff to quantify the number, or you'd have to double the civil service.
Well, I've got a staff of 630 people, and they do an excellent job, but we still haven't got that number in hand.
Now, you are remarkably praiseworthy of the civil servants themselves. I mean, remarkably.
Some of them.
Well, you're very nice.
Most of the top ones.
You say, I'm not going to criticize any individual civil servant, but you say, and I want to quote it to you, that you meet individuals, public servants, intelligent, hard-working, and imaginative, who don't seem to do their jobs properly. That's what you say in your report.
Well, it's a little license there, Jack, but you're quite right. It's a very curious thing to me. When you go to Ottawa, coming from Vancouver, where, say, Macmillan Bloedel is a big corporation here, you find out that transport, one department of government, is half as large again as Macmillan Bloedel. And you meet people heading up organizations like this who strike me as knowing what they're doing. They work hard, very, very hard. It's a terribly difficult job to be a deputy minister. It's not particularly highly paid. And given that they have the talent to run organizations like that, why is it that we don't end up with the kind of results that one would expect with the money spent on the process? So I spent a whole year this year with my researchers and auditors studying the question of constraints to productive management in the public service. The study produced sort of three basic results. One is there's political interference. That makes it difficult to manage. There's too much red tape. And there's more disincentives than incentives to manage productively.
And, of course, that means no matter how bright the civil servant is, if some minister is going over his shoulder and say, we don't need authority to spend that money without the authority, he does it.
The deputy ministers do what the minister tells them to do.
So therefore the laws of Canada, or the financial regulations of Canada, do they not matter? Can political interference ride roughshod over any decision by Act of Parliament or regulation?
Well, there are, of course, the Acts of Parliament. If there's an activity that's contrary to the laws of Parliament, I would report that if I found it. But there are Treasury Board guidelines, which in my view, from time to time, are bent.
Now, for instance, without getting into the details, you've drawn attention to many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars spent without authority, correct? Crow rate.
There are a number, yes, they're in the overpayments. It's a very small amount in terms of the total budget, but some of the departments have overspent their appropriations. Now, that's illegal. It may well have been good management at the time.
But it's illegal.
It is illegal, but if for example, and I don't think it was defense, but if defense had to put defense planes in the air right on the last 20 minutes of the fiscal year end, and they'd run on a budget, you know, you're not going to say don't fly that night because we haven't got money. You put the planes in the air.
Yeah, but I remember a piece in here about the crow rate where one, I think it was CN, got a very large sum of money indeed, which it did not have authority to receive.
Yeah, well, they paid out based on appropriations approved, but the law underlying those appropriations for the crow rate had yet to be passed, and yet the funds were advanced as if the crow bill was already passed.
Right now, what about our energy program? The PIP program, which is complained about very much by people here. Is the energy program, has it been properly managed, or do you find great gaps in, say, the Petrofina affair, the acquisition of the Petrofina, or any other of the Petro-Canada operations?
Well, the National Energy Program is a huge program. It's immense, and they've got that thing up and running. The law was only passed in the summer of '82. I think the activities had commenced several years prior to that. You ask if it's well managed. I guess it's well administered. It's administered in accordance with the law, and they did a good job getting it up, running. People get paid on time and the right amount, so that part's okay. My auditors didn't get involved, nor do I get involved, in the policy of the National Energy Program. Going on to your question about Petrofina, I've yet to be able to assure Parliament that Petro-Can got good value for money when they acquired Petrofina, because I haven't seen the records I want to see.
Have you asked for the records?
Yes.
Have you been refused?
They're very slow in coming.
In other words, they're doing the old Mandarin politician foot-dragging caper.
It's a long process to get what you need to get. I have all the law on my side to get it, but it's like pulling teeth.
Right, now what about overpayments, for instance, now, the normal old overpayments? Last year you were making a big noise about overpayments and unemployment insurance. Those are understandable, are they?
Well, part of it is because people make fraudulent claims. They're in a hurry to give service, and in doing so, they take the risk of paying somebody who's not entitled to a claim. And there are other reasons for error too, but that is the basic one, I think, is people claim money they're not entitled to. And there's a system to check that. They use a very sophisticated computer system, but there's still very large overpayments and some underpayments. My recollection is it's of the order of 200 to 300 million over and maybe 60 under. And I'd have to check my report to give you the exact figure.
But this is as efficient as we can expect any government to be on this massive size.
It can improve.
More with Kenneth Dye, the Auditor General, after the break. Kenneth Dye is the Auditor General of Canada, but you know, you really do us a disservice. Once a year, we get this report, right? It's almost impossible to digest this report so that the layman can understand it and you can get your message across. Why don't you split it up and issue it bit by bit throughout the year?
Just this recommendation I made to the President of the Treasury Board, and I understand there's draft legislation in place sitting on his desk ready to go. There's a lot of legislation in the hopper.
In other words, if you can get all-party agreement for this kind of thing, we could get one or two sections a month.
Well, my concern is that these chapters take, they're very expensive, cost a lot of money to do this work, and I think that Parliament should have them on a timely basis. And right now, I've got some chapters that are finished by summertime, and they have to sit waiting for publication around Christmas time, and I think that really is an inhibitor to the parliamentarians who have a right to know what the work we're doing.
And as a matter of fact, Christmas time is the time when the media is not necessarily on the tips of its toes either. Well, don't you think that the government is almost bound to refuse your request? Because if we got one chapter a month, for instance, that one chapter would receive detailed examination to the embarrassment of whatever government was in power.
Well, the chapters do get detailed examination at Public Accounts Committee, but I think it's the tabling time that gets the media attention. My job, of course, is not to entertain the media, but to make sure that Parliament knows what's going on.
Oh, well, your job is to inform the public through Parliament.
Yes.
And that's not necessarily an entertainment of the media, although we can have a good laugh at this $200 motel.
That's not funny, Jack. That's a waste of money.
But I mean sardonic laugh.
Yes, very.
And it's your duty to tell us that so we can say to the politicians who come, you were the cabinet minister that did this, you should be thrown out of your office on your ear. Because he must take responsibility, must he not?
I think he should.
I mean, the Deputy Minister cannot be blamed for anything that happens in the department.
My view is that Deputy Minister should also take responsibility for the accountability processes. The Minister can't possibly be informed of everything going in a large department. And my personal view, and I've testified this way at Parliament, is that if they're going to change the rules of Parliament, the Minister should take overall responsibility for policy, and that the Deputy Minister should be responsible for the running of the day-to-day affairs of the department.
Are they Auditor and Council people who can be relieved at any time, or are they civil servants as such?
They're senior civil servants who have been appointed by, I guess they are Auditor and Council. Sure they are.
Right now, back to the nitty-gritty. As I go around and I see the abominable state of our economy, I know there are many, perhaps hundreds of thousands of square feet of space empty in government offices. You point to a couple of wastages there. Could you detail them for me, please?
Well, there's 4 that are stick in Micro in Ottawa, 3 that are buildings owned or long-term leases that have not been used. That accounts for about 60,000 square meters. I think that's a very large amount of space.
That's not 60,000 square feet.
No, that's 10 times that amount.
Yeah, and 600,000 square feet.
Yeah, that's a lot of space. And in fact, one of them particularly annoyed me because I had a taxpayer write to me, angry as can be, saying he lived across from this building, and he wrote to me and saying, you know, I've watched this building remain empty. It's been heated for the last 5 years. And I cited it in my report 2 years ago. The response back from the Department of Public Works at the time was, well, it's going to be occupied soon. Certain renovations will be necessary. 2 years later, we go back, and nothing's happened.
It's still empty.
Still empty.
Still heated.
Still heated.
Still in Ottawa.
And still very expensive.
Still in Ottawa.
Yes.
But across the river in Quebec, they're using all the fancy space they built. Is that not so?
I think no, there's some space there too, I believe, and I'm not absolutely sure about that. The big one that really bothers me is a brand new building in Ottawa. Sorry, it's not a brand new building. It's a renovated building. They stripped the building of its outside walls and everything inside and rebuilt it. And this office is now being rented at $12 million a year, $1 million a month. And that started in December, I believe. And I don't think there's going to be any tenants until about March. And finally, the building will fill with government tenants through to the summer. So you've got about $4 million worth of rent being paid out before the first tenant arrives. Very expensive sport.
In other words, the government's going to occupy the building anyway, isn't it?
In the end.
In the end.
Yeah.
Now, what about no tender contracts? That was a scandal 25 years ago. Are we still doing the old no tender contract, caper up to a certain amount so that political favoritism can be used?
Well, I think we are. You know, if the contract happens to go through the Department of Supply and Services or through Treasury Board, those are pretty well handled. It's the ones where for one reason or another, the contract is individually let in a department. That's where the abuse level seems to be highest. They're pretty good at, in fact, I would say they're very good at Treasury Board and Department of Supply and Services.
Give me this year's depressing news on Canadair and the Challenger, please. Every now and again I see that it's now cost us, instead of another 150 million, another $1.5 billion. Is this a sink down which we continue to pour public money in a wasted effort to try and create an industry?
The Public Accounts Committee spent 5 meetings on this last June and really explored as much as they could in that time the operations of Canadair, and at that time Canadair was predicting a $1.9 billion loss, I think, or cost of getting the planes into production. And Canada had guaranteed $1.35 billion in loan guarantees. Now that company is now owned by CDIC, Canada Development Investment Corporation, and I believe they'll be making a presentation. My recollection was it was supposed to be before Christmas. I don't think it was done. Now I left Ottawa a couple of days before. On their financial needs for the balance of the year. But obviously that's a situation that's going to take a long time to turn around.
We have more guarantees out than we do in the Dome bailout. Is that not correct?
Well, there's no existing guarantee that I'm aware of on Dome. There's an arrangement of some $500 million on Dome. That's something like I cite it this year as similar to a letter of comfort, in that there's some comfort to lenders, banks particularly, who would know that if things got terribly tough, the government will come in for $500 million.
Hey, listen, tell me about that. I noticed the phrase a number of times. Where the government wants to bail out some potentially disastrous operation without signing an actual bank promissory note, it does what? Has a letter of?
Well, it has 2 things. Letters of comfort, which they've stopped using.
That's like a comfort station for the bank.
It was a letter from a minister to a lender saying Canada will continue to own the corporation. Well, lenders are very comfortable knowing that Canada owns the corporation when they lend to it because they know Canada will pay off in the end. Now that stopped because I can't claim credit for it, although we did cite the problem and it stopped. That's partly how Canadair got in so much trouble, all those letters of guarantee, or letters of comfort. Now they use guarantee, but a guarantee has to be approved by Parliament in the end, and that's important. The letters of comfort, there was no review by Parliament, and I keep looking at it as Parliament's auditor, but their control over public expenditure.
So you're dead against letters of comfort and you think you've got them?
I think that stopped.
Right.
But DOM's something like a letter of comfort.
A subject which I think is within your area is Lotto Canada.
Yes.
Now, first of all, I forget, is the Canadian government now out of lotteries as such?
Yes.
But Lotto Canada is still running a fancy office.
Well, they're just in the process of shutting it down, but they kept it running for about 3 years after they shut down Lotto Canada.
For what, $1 million a year?
Well, I think it was $700,000 or $800,000, close to $1 million, sure. And they were exploring a sports pool, but they didn't have a mandate to do that, and we were complaining they were spending money for a purpose that Parliament had not approved.
And as I recall, because people keep phoning me nowadays and saying, what's happening to lottery money? Where does it go? And if no one has faith in any lotteries as to the overall administration, isn't there 14 point some million dollars the federal government's still hanging on to that belongs to Lotto Canada?
Yes, I think it's a little smaller now. I think it might be 12, but anyhow, it's a large sum of funds that should be, in my view, a return to the Consolidated Revenue Fund.
Will that be undistributed divvy prizes from Lotto Canada?
Some of it is, yeah.
Some of it is.
Yeah.
Do you see a big improvement? Did you object to being called by His Eminence the Prime Minister a perfectionist paid to scrape and find fault?
Well, I was sitting in the gallery, the Speaker's gallery, when I saw the Prime Minister say that. He was, I think, not aware that that was the day the report was being tabled. Of course, he hadn't had a chance to be briefed or indeed read the report, and that was his opening remark. I rather liked his remark later when he said the Auditor General was a fair man. I preferred that one.
Well, you must be. That's your function, is it not? My thanks to Kenneth Dye, the Auditor General. We'll see you next January.
Well, I like to come to ski at Whistler each Christmas, so if you invite me, I'd be happy to come.
My thanks to Kenneth Dye. Next, we're going to go to the railroad man. Toot, toot. Bill King, going for the leadership of the NDP after the break. At 10:30 this morning in the NDP office in West Broadway in Vancouver, a fellow by the name of David Vickers, a political unknown, is going to throw his, and he is a political unknown, is going to throw his hat into the ring for the leadership of the NDP. Dave Barrett, as you know, finishes in May. Dave Barrett, as you know, probably will not be in the House for the remainder of the session because of that incredible performance by Parks and the Speaker himself during the last caper over in Victoria. Here this morning is Bill King. I did not expect you, Bill King, to, after you had been defeated in Revelstoke and gone back to the railroad, to come out of a retirement politically and run for the leadership. Why are you doing it?
Well, there's a variety of reasons, Jack. I took some time and contemplated what I was going to do with my life, quite frankly. And I watched the provincial scene unfold, and quite frankly, what I saw happening angered me. That was one of the factors that persuaded me to come back and offer my point of view, my perspective, to our party in the leadership contest. I was, of course, urged by quite a wide variety of people to contest the leadership. And I feel I have something to contribute to this province. Quite frankly, I am angered and very disturbed by the extremes that I see being foisted upon the people of the province of British Columbia. And I would like to do what I can to bring some reason and some logic to the equation in this province.
How long have you been a member of the NDP?
Oh, all my life, virtually.
How long did you serve in the House in Victoria?
12, 13 years.
You were widely well regarded, if not admired, as Minister of Labour. Which portfolio you held for how long?
Well, for the duration of the NDP government.
72 till 75.
Right.
Right. But people want to know, Bill King, what kind... Oh, let's take it the more negative way. Graham Lee made it quite clear that he regarded the Barrett regime as one which muzzled the NDP caucus. Are you a Barrett clone in terms of policy?
Well, I'm no one's clone, Jack.
I didn't mean that insultingly.
No, I appreciate that, but quite frankly, I have never been muzzled in the caucus or in the party, nor have I found any propensity by any of my colleagues to muzzle me. I'm not inclined to stand for that in any event.
All right, but I don't want to spend time on your coloration, but the fact is that you are a moderate NDP type socialist.
Sure,
middle of the road moderate.
I think so. I think that's a fair assessment, although I haven't really spent a lot of time analyzing where I fit philosophically. I think in the broad spectrum, I probably would be categorized that way. There are probably areas that you would consider me a flaming radical in, or an ultra-conservative, but I don't worry too much about that.
Name me one where you'd be a flaming radical. Medicare?
Well, I'd like to start a revolution on apathy in this province and lead a revolt against that. Revolutionary in that sense. Certainly, I think there is a tremendous amount of apathy. That's one of the reasons I think politics has come into disrepute in the province of BC. And the credibility of Parliament and its agencies has suffered. And I think that's pretty serious.
I don't know how you would correct it, to be quite honest, but let's look at the specifics. What is your specific opinion of the behavior of the Speaker of the House and the Deputy, that fellow Parks, and Bennett in denying Barrett re-entry to the House? Not Bennett, it's the Speaker, I suppose.
Well...
is that not an appalling state of affairs?
I think it is.
And did Mr. Bennett, however, not behave badly and injudiciously at the time?
Well, the Premier must take responsibility for the leadership of the House in the final analysis. It's true that the Speaker accepts the responsibility for keeping order. The Speaker was not in the chair. A brand new neophyte MLA was in the chair. The fact of the matter is that a well-respected politician, a man who served as the Premier of this province, has been evicted for a highly questionable purpose.
As a matter of fact, I used the wrong name in my question. I was meant to ask you, was Mr. Barrett not highly injudicious and silly in the way he allowed himself to be yanked out of the House by this fellow Parks?
Well, he saw it as a principle of parliamentary democracy, the right under parliamentary rule to challenge a ruling from the chair. And he stood on a principle.
Had Solidarity not, in effect, taken over the role of the NDP because of the NDP's disappearance from public view during the Solidarity crisis? And it did disappear from public view.
No, no one has taken over the role of the NDP. It is true that the government of this province has sought to downgrade and erode the credibility of Parliament by taking the business of Parliament outside the House. The opposition can't help that. But I think the opposition did a first-class job in terms of opposing the package of legislation that the government brought in. When the Premier chooses to leave Parliament and negotiate and to deal with extra parliamentary bodies, there's not a great deal that the official opposition can do about it, but there's a price to be paid for going down that road. And the price is the downgrading and the erosion of public respect for Parliament. But I think that's a mistake.
Had I been a good NDP or trade unionist, or even just a trade unionist during that crisis, I would have wanted leadership from Mr. Barrett and what I was supposed to do. What would your advice have been? Would you have come out as leader of the NDP and said, I support Solidarity and I advocate 150,000 people on the streets to force this government to back down? Because Barrett didn't do that. Barrett sat on the fence.
Well, look, I'm dealing with the leadership of this party for the future. I am not here, Jack, to discuss the policies that might have been taken in the past. Insofar as my position is concerned, I think the social credit government brought on themselves the social and economic response that they received from the community. And I think that response was predictable. And I think that the people who responded to that harsh and extreme legislation were socially responsible people. No question about it.
Do we need solidarity now?
I don't think so, other than to follow through on agreements that were made outside Parliament between their representatives and the government.
There is widespread belief that, in fact, we know that social credit is going to amend the Labour Act. The hawks in social credit want right-to-work laws. I don't know what Mr. Bennett wants in detail yet. If social credit brought in right-to-work laws, would you support a general strike?
I would rather take the parliamentary course of opposing that very narrow and foolish direction, which would create industrial relations chaos in this province. I think what we need is some reasonable voice in this province to persuade the government that that is not the way to go. In the final analysis, if they insist on thrusting through punitive legislation, which is highly divisive, which is inflammatory, then they, as the government, must face the consequences of social unrest. And Jack, I am not going to be held responsible for their conduct in terms of inflaming social conscience in this province.
More with Bill King after the break. It's widely believed that one of the reasons Barrett lost the last election was because he seemed to indicate that he would scrap the restraint program. Would you fire Ed Peck if you were Premier of the province today? Compensation Stabilization Commissioner?
I don't know, Jack. I would like to perhaps occupy the position as leader of this party and Premier of the province for some time before I made that kind of decision.
But Bill, you're going to do a Mulroney on me. You see, Mulroney's going to say nothing. You have a good image, well respected, you know, not that much of an old-timer, but you'll not tell me anything. You won't even tell me if you would nationalize, if you would accept the federal NDP policy on prostitution, which I'm not going to ask you.
I'd like very much to tell you, but in my terms, not yours. You preface these things, you know, in such a way that the answer becomes a bit tricky. So let me give you my answer.
I'll give you a simple question. What new policies would you introduce as leader of the NDP?
Well, one of the things that does distress me is the fixation and the phobia with restraint, that somehow restraint is going to lead us out of the recession that we are in. And quite frankly, you know, the market system has collapsed in North America. That's the reason for the recession. Working people didn't create the recession. High interest rates, and as a consequence, the lack of foreign markets created the recession. And it seems to me that one of the positive ways we can start to extricate ourselves from the recession is to find ways to put more money in the hands of consumers and get them spending it, so that there is incentive for investors, so that in fact there is a market alternative which we lack at the moment. One of the things that bothers me, you know, and I think you might have a look at, Jack, is in commenting on the political situation in BC, is the fact that we are lagging behind all the rest of Canada in terms of the economic performance of this province. No one is focusing in on that. We're talking about restraint as if this magic word, this cliche, were some economic strategy. It is not.
Well, as far as
Bill Bennett's, it is a diversion, really.
As far as Bill Bennett's concerned, it's just to try and balance the book strategy, is it not?
Well, I think it's a bit of a diversion, quite frankly, because I haven't really seen evidence of restraint insofar as the government's performance is concerned, their travel, any of those other amenities which ministers enjoy. Quite frankly, the economic performance of the province is not meeting the national average.
Yeah, but if he lays off 3,500 civil servants, or 30% of the civil servants, that is restraint. That gets rid of a lot of employees, a lot of salary, a lot of money, a lot of pensions, a lot of everything.
Well, I'm not sure whether it's the kind of restraint that is going to benefit the economy of British Columbia. Our problem now is a lack of spending power, a lack of disposable income in the hands of people, creating demand. This government's apparent response is to throw even more people out of work in the name of restraint, but it seems to me that will be counterproductive in the long term.
Bill, if he hasn't got the money, how can he have a 17-to-1 pupil-teacher ratio? What's wrong with them laying off teachers if he can't afford to pay for them? If he decides he can't, could you keep the pupil-teacher ratio at 17-to-1?
I tell you one thing, Jack, I am not prepared to accept the downgrading, the impairment of public education in this province as in the name of restraint in the short term.
Okay.
We have the British Columbia Railway carrying a debt load that's incredible for years and years. Sure, virtually.
Yeah, it's virtually.
Supported and paid by the government. If our priority, if this government's priority, I should say, is to keep afloat that railroad with subsidies from the taxpayer's pocket, how is it that we are zeroing in on education, quality education, that'll affect the lives and the aspirations of generations to come?
Okay, I've got the question for you. You would therefore support deficit financing as much as required for universities and schools?
If that is essential in the meantime to preserve quality education, by all means, that is a priority as far as I am concerned.
You certainly would not kill perhaps you would kill BC Rail.
No, I'm not suggesting we should kill it. I'm just drawing an analogy between the priorities this government places on such things as a railway versus education, quality education for the population.
In other words, you would, and I'm just rephrasing it, you would be prepared to deficit finance education as an investment in the future.
Look, there's a bottom line to education. I do not believe that we can cut back to a point where the education of our young people is suffering and becomes second-rate. We will pay in economic and social terms a much higher price than any savings we realized in the process.
But Bill King, you must be well aware that there's been so much fat in the bureaucratic system, it's been appalling.
Oh, we're talking about a different thing.
Hospitals, education, almost every department of government, fat and sassy. Bennett sat on his butt for 7.5 years and did nothing about it until he began to panic, correct?
If there's fat and waste, by all means, let's ferret it out and let us eliminate that fat and waste.
But nobody ever does.
But you don't do that with a broad axe on the public education system, Jack. The problem is, and I think you've accepted it too, this cliche that restraint, this magic word restraint, is going to solve all our problems. Hell, they're applying a broad axe to much needed social programs, and I will not agree to that kind of broad axe approach in terms of eliminating inefficiency in government. That's irresponsible.
But the only political answer is deficit financing.
It may be at the moment. It may be, or it may be, that by shifting priorities in terms of spending, that we don't have to deficit finance to preserve these programs.
Give you another one right now. Utilization of Medicare shoots up. Bennett has not got the money on his present course to pay the doctors' bills. Must not the doctors, too, finally be taken off fee-for-service and put on salaries?
Well, I don't think we propose anything of that nature without full discussions with everyone involved. I don't think
I know, but
you come in with that.
I'm just trying to be a little tricky here.
I realize you are.
No, but I'm making a serious point. Here we have a almost totally socialized medical system, correct? In 1981, I think it was, there was 325 million in payments to doctors.
Yes.
In the upcoming year, it's close to 700 million. Now,
question.
they're the free enterprises in the system. They're getting fee-for-service. Don't get the increase, utilization goes up. Who is going to be the political party that says the time has come to clip a doctor's wings? Will it be? Because Dennis Cook, when he was Minister of Health, the doctors loved Dennis. He gave them everything they asked for.
Sure. Well, Jack, you and I have had this discussion before. And I've talked about this in the legislature, too, about the day that we start to evaluate various functions in our society. Perhaps doctors' salaries, perhaps railroad engineers, perhaps radio hotliners.
You can fire me anytime you want.
No, but what is the relative value of functions in society?
At least I am a free enterprise. The doctors pretend to be free enterprises, but are in fact socialized.
No, I go along with that. Look, I believe in free enterprise so long as it's competitive. Nothing wrong with that. But the problem is, with some of you free enterprisers, you want free enterprise for yourself, but you want fixed conditions for others, you know, and you can't have it both ways.
Except that when you live by the sword, you die by the sword.
That's right.
If I have one listener tomorrow, no more Webster.
Oh, sure, you've got competition in that sense.
No, I haven't really, only on paper. Calls to Bill King after the break. Well, what will it cost you to run a campaign like this for the leadership? When does Davy quit, May?
Well, the leadership convention is in May. In terms of what Dave's plans are, whether he quits at that time or prior to it, I'm not aware. I think the party has set a $20,000 limitation on the expenditures for leadership.
That's
candidates.
Fair.
Yeah.
Mind you, you'd be the first candidate from the interior of British Columbia for the NDP. Oh no, Stupich is from the island.
Yes, he's from the island.
Passerell's
from the northern interior, and Graham Lee is from the northern interior as well.
Of course he is. He's
well, he's northern coast.
Prince
Rupert, yes. Yeah.
And you're, of course, Revelstoke.
Yes, indeed.
How long were you back working on the railroad?
I've been back since the end of July.
You're still working?
Yes, yes.
You're still doing your shifts?
I'll work, you know, when I'm not on the road campaigning for the leadership contest, which I, of course, will be a good deal from now on.
Okay, here's Bill King, who wants to run as leader of the NDP, who is running as leader of the NDP. What do you think of him? Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, Jack. I'd like to say hello to Mr. King, and I wish him luck, and I'm familiar with the area and the riding he formerly had. I want to know, Mr. King, as you know in the area that you represent, several people from the Alberta area have accommodation that they occupy during the summer months for maybe a week or two, and yet I find them on the voting list. I wonder, is there any rules and regulations to this matter?
Well, the rules for voting are that you be a resident and be 6 months in the province.
Yeah, you must be a resident of the province. If they're improperly on the voters list, sir, you should report it to the Registrar of Voters. Just let me get back to another economic question. Is Northeast Coal a disaster, a social credit disaster, or is it, on the other hand, a necessary public works project subsidized by the people of BC to keep 5,000 or 6,000 people going?
The problem with it, Jack, is that the government has never put all of the data on the table in the legislature so the opposition could make a realistic economic appraisal. But be that as it may, we do know that about $1.5 billion of public money has been allocated toward Northeast coal development. Now, that's the priority this government has set. As a consequence, other social programs have been shortchanged.
But you wouldn't...
And it worries me when I see prices for coal, both from the Northeast and from the Southeast, being negotiated downward by the Japanese steel industry. I think that spells some concern and some problems for us in terms of the economic viability of Northeast
But that
coal.
could have happened to any government. You're not saying social credit was particularly stupid in that.
Except that we took a tremendous amount of public money and allocated it to a coal development which was in competition with an already established private sector development in southeastern British Columbia, to the benefit of our offshore customer. And from a straight business standpoint, that does not make a lot of sense to me.
I had the head guys from both places on this program, and they admitted in front of the cameras live that they were in competition with each other on the same market.
Sure.
I was staggered by that particular revelation. Go ahead to Bill King.
Good morning, Mr. Jackson, Mr. King.
Good morning.
I would like to talk about the restraint, and I feel it's just a catchword, but these people that are thrown onto the, out of their work, the civil servants, they, once their UIC is used up, then they go on welfare. And so I understand that the 5% are not going to be declared employable by Mr. Bennett.
Hold on, ma'am. You're not making much sense to me at all. I don't know what... Do you have a political question you want to ask Mr. King? Are you an NDPer?
Yes.
Okay. Would you back King for leader?
I don't know. I haven't any idea of what he is coming up with.
Neither have I, except he's doing a bit of a joke clock on me and telling me he'll restudy everything that comes up and set up another committee. But here's a call from Revelstoke.
That's grossly unfair,
Grossly
Jack.
unfair.
Grossly unfair.
It may be, but I like to keep the calls moving. What I want to get from you is, do you think King should be the leader of the NDP? Don't tell me about all these other little complicated nuances. Go ahead from Revelstoke.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, Bill.
Good morning.
Tony Jenkins here, an old golf partner of yours.
What's your point, Tony?
Here's the question, Bill. It's an area that you do know something about. As you know, the existing labor code doesn't necessarily grant to all union members access to that even most basic principle of democracy, the supervised secret ballot. Now, McClelland has suggested that this would be changed in new labor legislation. Do you see anything wrong with all union members being guaranteed access to the secret ballot? At the moment, as you know, certain strike votes are taken by a show of hands where intimidation is possible. Well, any comments on that?
Good question.
Well, Tony is partially right and partially wrong. And,
well, I'm right in that strike votes are taken now by a show of hands in a small room, and that those, for instance, in one case, the 3 members who voted against supporting Solidarity were warned verbally and by letter that their jobs were in danger. I have copies of the letters.
Trouble with Tony, I know him quite well, and he does carry on a bit.
I have copies of the letter,
The
Bill,
point is, Jack, if I can answer the gentleman, the Labor Code does provide now for a supervised vote on strike action. The Labor Relations Board supervises those strike votes, and ratification votes also on contracts. In terms of the internal workings of a union, whether they wish to support an offer by management, that has always been considered the internal business of a union in much the same way that other social organizations are allowed full autonomy in their decision-making.
Just a minute, you've raised a point that confuses me now. When are government-supervised strike votes used? Government-supervised strike votes.
They are used for a ratification vote on a new contract. They are used and supervised by the Labor Relations Board on strike votes.
But a union can take a strike vote without it being supervised?
Sure, internally, yes.
Internally, yes. In other words, they can go...
But in terms of serving notice after for 72-hour strike notice, as I understand it, with the amendment that this government brought in, all of those votes are now supervised by a representative of the Labor Relations Board.
Oh, there was a development there for last year on this.
No, this happened a couple of years ago.
A couple of years ago. Well, that's worthwhile following up, really, because it's the kind of thing that if there is a supervised strike vote mandatory now, there wouldn't be no need for such obvious change in the future. No. Go ahead, please. You want a break?
Yeah, I'm here.
Go ahead from the... No, I'll take a break and you'll be first up after the break, Nanaimo. Calls to Bill King. One of half a dozen people going for leadership of the NDP from Nanaimo. From Nanaimo.
Yeah, Jack.
Uh-huh.
How are you? Mr. King, I'd like to ask you 2 questions, if I may.
Sure.
Number 1 is on the right to work. I believe that you said that you don't believe that a person, the Right to Work Act should be enforced. Well, I am of the opinion that if I have wanted to work as an engineer or any other part, I have not the right to work unless I belong to a union. I'll wait for an answer on that. And the second one is the economy. I believe that on the economy it's like a well, that if your well goes dry, you have 3 choices. Either try to suck the mud out of it. That's number 1. Number 2 is to wait for the water to rain to fall and get it refilled again. And number 3 is to change and drill in another place where the water is flowing.
Let's leave the economy and deal with the right to work. He's saying that there is no freedom to work if he must belong to a union to get a job. That's what he's saying.
Well, the trouble with right to work, it's a cliche that's inaccurate. You know, they're talking about legislation which does not exist in British Columbia, mercifully.
But you're talking about a practice which does exist.
Well, the practice that exists is varied. There are variations of the RAND formula. I work for the railway. I get a job on the railway through my own resources. The company hires me if they feel I am fit, and on all of those that come along today. And once I am accepted and receive my training and serve my probation, then I am required to join the union or to pay the equivalent of union dues to the company, or to the union. That is a variation of the RAND formula. And it varies in different industries.
With due respect, what the objection is by the right-wing free enterprisers and the Fraser Valley construction outfits, etc., is that they strongly object to the Building Trades Council closed shop hiring hall provisions, whereby, and the objective in the interior, they've got to phone up the hiring hall in Vancouver, and somebody will go up who perhaps is useless, but he's next on the union board, and the employer, one, has no right to hire the man he wants, and a local employee has no right to go.
You know why?
Why?
Because they signed an agreement saying that we agree between these two parties, the companies and the unions, that the unions will provide the staff we need. It's a private agreement that they have signed.
But it's a breach of the charter.
The problem is that a lot of people discuss this issue and they don't understand industrial relations. And I don't really want to get into a big technical argument about it.
Agreed.
But the construction industry is unique because there is no permanent seniority with a company like other industrial unions have.
Good point.
That's the difference.
One question. Would you support common sites which were entirely unionized?
I don't know. As far as the common site legislation is concerned, it was part of the labor code I introduced in this province. I think that makes infinite sense, but it's administered and decided by the Labor Relations Board.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack and Mr. King.
Yes.
I believe that probably the most important resource we have in the province is our students.
Yes.
The question I would like to put to Mr. King, he made a comment about school money being pumped in to support the BC Rail. Would he advocate, should he get the position of Premier of this province, privatization of the BC Rail and putting the money that is currently being pumped into BC Rail back into the education?
Well, sir, the point I made was simply to draw an analogy between the amounts of monies that the public guarantees for BC Rail. Northeast Coal is another one. Various other priorities that this government has set. The government is free to set different priorities. One of those priorities might be quality education for the population of this province. I do not see privatization of BC Rail as a issue at all at the moment.
The better answer being, of course, that that schools don't provide revenue, whereas BC Rail on paper and Northeast Coal on paper pay their own debts on paper.
It's a pretty narrow and short-sighted view, though, in terms of the real wealth of this province and our future.
God, things are dreadful just now, aren't they?
Really are. One of the other things, the gentleman talked about the well running dry, you know. Well, it's true the economy's in trouble. But it is significant that the banks, all through this economic recession, have had the highest profits ever, you know.
Would you nationalize BC Tel?
BC Tel?
That's an old trick NDP question.
Oh, no, we're not legally entitled to. Anyway, it's under federal charter.
Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yep.
Good morning, Bill, Jack.
Good morning.
I'm a trade unionist, and I've been a party supporter of the NDP for a couple of years now. And but I'd like to ask a question in regards to the future of the party in a lot of ways. It tends to have fallen behind in the public image for a while, and but an opinion of a lot of people is the NDP seems to be a bit of the middle of the road lately, and maybe just a little left of the social credit in a lot of ways. And I'd like to see what would you like to do to give new, push to the party and give it a new mandate and possible achievements of becoming the next government of this province?
Well, I think you're partially right in that I think there's a need for real debate in this party about our policies. I think we have to bring our policies up to date on resource development, a whole variety of areas that are crucial to the economy of the province. And either where our policies haven't been reviewed for some time or where those policies are incomplete. And certainly I would try to act as a catalyst to initiate that kind of debate.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, Mr. Webster. You said that you wanted to know if people thought Mr. King would be a good leader for the NDP party?
Yes.
Well, I'd like to give my opinion on that. I'm a parent of 3 children and a primary teacher who went to work during the strike. And I think that Mr. King would be an excellent leader for the NDP party. Not only that, I'm going to join the party and donate some money to his campaign and work to see that he gets elected.
And you sent your kids to school during the strike?
No, I didn't do that. I didn't think they needed that stress.
Well, there you are. We found a supporter. We'll wish you well.
Thank you, Jack. It was a positive program.
And we shall see you on the hustings, an old-fashioned expression which for you kids and recent American immigrants means on the campaign scene for the leadership of the NDP.
Thank you.
My thanks to Bill King. Next, Nightmare in Los Angeles, after the break. If a Californian comes up to British Columbia and gets mugged, shot, or attacked in a criminal manner, we will pay him out-of-pocket expenses, wage loss, all medical expenses, rehab, pain and suffering amounts up to $25,000, and even a pension if necessary. But if a British Columbian gets mugged and nearly murdered in Los Angeles, it would seem on the face of it at the moment that they will do nothing to help tourists who get hammered in Los Angeles. Listen to the story of the Sprechers. So you think you had a Merry Christmas and are all set for a Happy New Year. I want you to share with me the experiences of a Surrey couple who went through a nightmare in the city of Los Angeles, California, on the 27th of December, just a couple of weeks ago. And first I want you to meet Eric Sprecher. Right, Eric?
That's right.
And his wife, Hila. Eric, how close were you to being murdered?
As close as you ever can come be. Just a step away,
just
more or less.
A step away. Now, you'd been headed to Mexico, had you not, Hila, on a holiday. So you tell me the beginning of the story, and then all the drama and the trouble we'll get from your husband. Where were you bound?
We wanted to go to Mexico for our 30th wedding anniversary, which was on the 28th of December, and it never happened.
So you flew down from here?
We flew to Los Angeles. There we had a overnight stay. We got picked up from the airport.
And you went to stay at which
hotel?
Which hotel?
The Century Inn, Airport Century Inn Hotel.
That's
in
the
Los
one.
Angeles.
That's right.
And apparently it was not a very good area, but we didn't know that.
Now, you'll get Eric to tell me about what happened. That night, you went out to do something particular, did you not?
We arrived right after I left again to buy some flowers for the next morning wedding anniversary. Coming down to the lobby, I asked the driver which had brought us there where I could get some flowers. He said, well, just walk down to the next block over there. There's a market. So I looked at what's a long city block. There was a lot of traffic on the street. I saw some people walking along the street, so I didn't think at anything at all, just went on my way. While walking, I realized, well, there were 3 black people and one real white blonde fellow walking. And all of a sudden, the white young fellow, it was a young fellow, he dashed across the street through all the fairly heavy traffic. I realized more or less I couldn't make anything out of it. I didn't think much of it.
You wondered what he was doing running across the street.
Why would you run like crazy across the street like this?
Mm-hmm.
And I kept on walking. Those 3 fellows left, walked 2, same direction, in front of me, but slowed down. So I was gaining in about middle of the block. There were no houses on either side of the street there. I was up to about 5, 6 feet behind him by now. One of the fellows bent down, pretending to tie shoelaces. And the other one, they just walked a few steps and then were waiting along a fence.
Do you know?
So I smelled something and thought, well, go over to the other side of the street. But by this time, I was about 3 steps from the fellow down on the floor already. Trying to cross the street, this fellow jumped up, and in that moment, everything went so fast, there was no thinking involved, just reflex movement. He came up, I saw a hand coming up, I didn't know it was a gun, or I didn't think about guns, or a knife. But anyway, just his hand came up, my hand came up, and then bang, bang, whole thing was done.
Simple as that?
Simple as that.
Was this one of the black men or the white man?
No, there were only 3 blacks left. Remember the white one, he dashed across the street before.
So all of a sudden you're confronted by the man from behind?
No, from front.
From front.
Would have been behind. He would have been behind me if I would have kept going. I would have been between those 3 guys.
Correct, but the moment you put your hand up, did you hit the gun? Did you know you'd hit a gun?
I grabbed his hand. It's more or less, and it's all split seconds. And you see the gun that I pushed against it, he pushed against it.
And 2 shots.
And he shot right away.
And where were you hit?
Right beside the throat, out the back.
1 shot or 2 shots?
2 shots.
2 shots?
Yeah.
Right, and you didn't even get a chance to say, hey, you're robbing me, here's my wallet.
Went too fast, he shot too fast.
Shot too quickly, and then they ran?
Yeah.
So what happened to you?
First two guys ran right after the first shot. And after the second shot, we were still struggling a little bit, but then he ripped himself loose and ran off too.
And there you're left bleeding from your bullet wounds in your neck?
Yeah, well, I tried to hold it with my hand and tried to wave down one of the cars, but everybody keeps going there. Nobody is stopping for anything.
How did you get to hospital?
I just ran back to the hospital, to the hotel.
And they called?
Into the lobby, there were 2 East Indian type fellows. They were scared out of their wits as soon as they saw me. But one of them phoned the police. And when I came out, I didn't want to bloody all their lobby, so I went out again and was sitting in front of the lobby on a rock. Yes, holding myself together.
You certainly are housebroken. Even if you've been shot in the neck, you're not going to grip on the lobby carpet, eh?
But lucky enough, apparently an ambulance was traveling the other side of the street and saw the thing happen.
And off you go to hospital. They stopped and came back for you?
They turned around, and as a minute or a couple of minutes after I arrived at the hotel, the ambulance was there. But they didn't do anything, they just stood there. I was wondering, why don't they come and get me?
Didn't they?
Well, they didn't know what was, I could have been a dope pusher or whatever.
Yeah.
Or could be armed, or could have been involved, they didn't know. But then one of the 2 fellows out of the lobby went out to the ambulance and explained this. I had been shot. And I, by the time, walked already over to the ambulance. And when they saw me, all bloody there, the one just took me in.
Away to the hospital.
And drove off to the hospital.
Let me ask Hila this. You were not aware of this at this time. This is now somewhat after 11 o'clock at night on the 27th of December.
No, it was before 11. I think he got shot at 11. And, well, I think he was away about 10 minutes, and then I got a phone call from the lobby to come down. Something had happened to my husband. But they wouldn't say what, and since he actually has a bad heart, I thought maybe something wrong with his heart. But then I got down there, and they said he was taken away with the ambulance already, and I just you know, we found out where he went, and I took a taxi and went after him.
Well, now you were in hospital from the 27th until, for how many days?
31st.
31st days. And they treated you, you feel you got good treatment in the hospital?
It was a good hospital. Treatment was first class.
Did anyone, I noticed the police report here that there is a Criminal Victims Compensation Act in California of something to that doings. Will you be covered by any payments? I'm not talking about your hospital bills or anything like that. Here we have victims of violent crime compensation. Would you be covered by that because you were shot by a mugger in Los Angeles?
That's what we just found out that we won't be.
That you will not be?
No.
Because you must be a resident of California to be covered by that. Now, what about the British Columbia Criminal Injuries Compensation Act? Will you be covered by that?
No, I phoned them also, and they say they cannot cover us because it didn't happen here. So we're just left out in the cold. We're just right in the middle there.
Right in the middle. Now, I hope you had insurance for your...
We did have insurance for the medical, we had BCAA.
BCAA.
Yeah.
They'll probably cover you properly because...
I sure hope so. I don't know yet.
You weren't required to pay the bill up front because the hospital wasn't sure if you were covered by this or not.
No, they let us go, and also I involved the consulate there, and because I didn't really know what to do, and they phoned the hospital, and I think because of that and all the circumstances, they do not know what to do. Police involved.
On that particular...
They let us go
as a matter
without
of
paying it yet.
How long were you in hospital?
Right away.
What was 3.5 days?
4 nights.
3.5, 4 nights.
4 nights.
How much would the bill have been, can I ask?
It's between, just the hospital bill is between $6,000 and $7,000.
Plus the doctors on top of that?
Plus the doctors, yes. We haven't got the bills. I didn't see the bills for them yet.
What a horrifying experience. Have you had any, you won't be able to tell yet whether or not what, if any, residual damage you have suffered?
No, I saw my family doctor here as far as he can tell me. It was a clean shot. Nothing really vital was damaged. There's some side effects, but you can expect. Maybe a little bit loss of hearing.
I think he was very, very lucky that, you know, he was shot just
the sheerest fluke. I mean, if it got you dead in the centre or on your jugular or something, you could well have been dead.
What I said, just half an inch to the right, more or less, it would have made all the difference.
Or 6 inches higher and you'd have been gone forever. Yeah. What a 30th wedding anniversary you two have had, eh?
Yes.
You never did get to Mexico.
Not yet.
Well, I hope we will, though.
Hey, and of course, were you going down CPR?
Yes, we went by CPR.
Oh, well, you'll get the refund on your ticket, hopefully. Don't forget to apply for it, eh?
Oh, thank you, I will.
Don't forget to apply for that. Now, I've got one little bit of news for you, because you've already, with some help, confirmed that, one, you're not covered, for the important thing is you're alive, right?
Yeah.
But you're not covered by the BC Criminal Injuries Compensation Act. You're not covered by the California one. So, therefore, the Ombudsman of British Columbia has detailed an officer to make a special investigation of your case to see if there is any way that you can be covered either in California or here for obviously the misery, the pain, the suffering, and who knows, perhaps some residual loss of hearing or damage to your physique.
Yeah, we're also speaking for everybody else, which might happen to them when they're over there and having a holiday and think everything is going to be fine, and then something like this happens and all of a sudden nobody's there to help them and would cover you know, even if somebody would get crippled for life there would be nobody to compensate them for.
I don't know how you could cover it.
Just imagine the Olympics coming up there. Those fellas must have, will have a heyday with all the tourists. Nobody, especially coming from European countries, I think nobody will expect anything like it.
So therefore your advice from hard practical experience is even in essentially the hotel that you were in, it's a good hotel.
Well, it was a well-known hotel as far as we knew.
It's a well-known hotel, you know, and it's not far from the airport. It's a place where many people would stay, but it ain't safe, is it?
it wasn't safe at all.
Apparently no place is safe, as long as you walk.
You might, in other words, it's dangerous to walk in Los Angeles.
Yes, at night nobody walks there, but then coming from BC, you don't think this way.
Well, can I wish you a happy 30th, happy 31st
We sure can if we need it.
wedding anniversary, and we'll see what the Ombudsman is going to tell us, and I'll follow through in California and see what they want to do to try and correct their tourist image, to say the least.
It should be.
Best of luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hope you get 100% recovery. Eric Sprecher indeed was very lucky, shot twice through the throat with apparently no major damage and perhaps, hopefully, a perfect cure. But you know, California is quite unique. It's got a most general criminal compensation program, but only for residents of California. You know, let me explain. If a Californian is mugged in British Columbia, he is covered fully by our program, which gives out-of-pocket expenses, wage loss up to maximum of $15,000 a year, all medical expenses, rehab, awards for pain and suffering, a maximum of $25,000, and the program costs up here only $2.5 million, and a form of pension on some occasions. But it doesn't work the other way around. Now, Hawaii, where there's been a lot of trouble with tourists, they've mended their image very well indeed. BC resident attacked in Hawaii, the state of Hawaii will cover all costs, including wage loss, pain and suffering, right? And British Columbia has got reciprocal programs with, I think, all the provinces of Canada except PEI. Is that correct? Yes, that's correct. But California, no, it just doesn't seem to work at all at the moment. We're going to find out from the California Governor's Office what they plan to do about this one. Because the hospital expenses and all other expenses of the Sprechers should be covered by the state of California. And if they don't want to cover it, we'll just tell them, be very careful about going to Expo 86 or going to California, or be very, very clearly warned not to go out in the streets at all anywhere in California at night. I think that's a fair comment to make. I'll be back after the break. Got a very good story for tomorrow morning about where not to sell your 5 brick shares. We've also got Paul Fraser who's doing the federal inquiry into, believe it or not, prostitution laws in Canada. Nobody can ever make up their mind in this country about anything at all. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. precisely.